Okay. I have a little introduction I want you guys to know. So Taylor is a dietitian. That's her full-time job. And like she says, she wants to help women stop dieting and heal their relationship with food. She is from Michigan originally, but she lives in Mississippi at the moment. That's where she went to school and where she works and where she lives now with her fiance. She just recently got engaged, and her two kitties. And she's also a fitness instructor and a beachbody coach. And I know, are you still doing MBF? I think you were recently doing
Yeah,
MBF.
I just started MBFA, so
Okay, awesome.
booty is a little sore today.
Oh yeah, that her leg day is brutal. So Taylor has a lot of nutritional knowledge and mindset around food, all the things that she's going to share with us. And I sent her all your questions. So just have your notebook ready, put stuff in the chat if you want. I'll be monitoring that. And yeah, Taylor, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I was just saying before everyone hopped on that I feel like a lot of you guys, the ones that reply to me and stuff on Instagram. So I always appreciate the replies and the likes and things like that. But like Ashley said, my full-time gig is a dietitian. Right now, I'm still working full-time at my job at a university at Mississippi, but I also have an online private practice that I started back in, I guess, September, October. And so my goal is to take that full-time by the end of this year. So kind of working on that. And that's what I'm always posting about and things like that. But I guess just to start out, I'll kind of tell you a little bit about my philosophy around nutrition, and then that might help you to better understand some of my answers to your questions. And then, like I was saying to Ashley a few minutes ago, you guys have a lot of questions, and I know you probably don't want to sit here for an hour and listen to me chat and babble. So I tried to group them as much as possible. And then if there's anything I missed or like something you feel like I didn't cover at all, then like Ashley said, put it in the chat box and so we can either come back to it or something like that. So, like I said, kind of my overall nutrition philosophy is that there's no such thing as bad food. And I know most of you have heard that before, but a lot of what we hear when it comes to food and how we think about food comes from diet culture, right? And diet culture is essentially a societal norm that tells us that we're going to be happier, better people if we live in a smaller body. And that's not necessarily true, but diet culture and diet society has really used that as a way to target people, specifically women, to buy products, right? Like, oh, buy our supplements and buy this diet and buy this and buy that. And that has really taken off, and why the diet industry now makes over $70 billion a year. And so then people have all these false thoughts about food in their head. And when they go to diet, they wonder why it doesn't work and things like that. And it's typically because a lot of those diets that you see are things that are short-term fixes, right? Like 6-week quick fix, or 30-day you'll lose weight guaranteed. And a lot of times they're not addressing what would be the root cause. So I know some of you had questions about like emotional eating or just different behaviors and habits. So meal planning or getting enough sleep or managing your time or your stress management, like all of those things are important for having an overall healthy diet and lifestyle that those types of quick fix diets don't always address. So like Ashley said, I kind of have made it my mission to really kind of go against diet culture and, teach people like the real truth about nutrition, and also help people to understand and be a little bit happier in the bodies that they're in. I know, like I said, you guys follow me on Instagram. So one thing I always like to say is, even if you want to change your body, like it's okay to have like physique goals and fitness goals and things like that, but you still have to love your body and be an ally with your body. Because if you are trying to hate your body into something that you want it to be, like it's not going to work, right? You're not going to treat it properly. You're not going to give it what it needs. You're not going to nourish it. So really treating your body as somebody that you want to help. Like I always say, when you have an ally, you want to help that person, right? Because then, if you help them now, they're going to help you in return in the future. So almost thinking about your body in that same way, like what can I do now to nourish and take care of my body so that when I do have these physique goals or want to change my body composition or things like that, it's going to help me out in the future in return. So I kind of hope that gives you a little bit of a better idea. And then, like I said, once I get into the diet questions, I will address some of that like more good versus bad food type things. So any questions about any of that before we move on? Any comments, anything? We good? Okay.
That was great. I was just going to say that was great. I haven't actually heard that where, thinking of your, being an ally to your body, like loving your body, but also, I don't know. I really like that analogy.
Thank you. Yeah. So like I was saying, I kind of grouped, you guys had some great questions and it would take me forever to answer all of these. So I kind of tried to group them into like diet type questions and then emotional eating. And then some of you had questions about like family type eating or feeding children or talking about food to your children. So I kind of went in line. And then, like I said, if I miss anything, definitely stop me, put it in the chat box, anything like that. So one of the questions, which I think will be a good kind of like set the frame type question, is about balance. Like, how do you just create balance around your diet in general? And I know a lot of you, if you've done like the Beachbody programs, like you've learned about like carbohydrates and like the little, some of you might be doing like, somebody put something in UPF, US, what is it?
Yes, those are the containers.
Is that the cups? Okay,
Yes,
I was like, I heard the container, or I've used the containers before, but I wasn't sure what that was. Okay, that makes sense. So anyways, you guys all have a knowledge of kind of what those different foods are, but usually the approach that I teach to a balanced diet is when you're creating a plate, we try to include 3 categories: a starch or a carbohydrate, because that's what's going to give you energy; protein, because that is what helps to rebuild and refuel; and then color. So color could be a fruit or a vegetable. And that's usually for color, I say one or the other, because for breakfast, you might not have vegetables, but then for lunch, you might have a salad and you might not have fruit, for instance. So kind of thinking about that as a fruit or a vegetable. And those are kind of 3 components that you always want to have. And then I always also really like to talk about the 80-20 rule, or I like to say more like 70-75, 20-25 rule. But if you've ever heard of that rule, that is basically, we really want to focus about 70 to 80% of our diet on good, nutrient dense, full, like nourishing foods. When I say nutrient density, does anyone know what nutrient density is? Okay, good. So nutrient density, you're focusing on foods that keep you full. They have a lot of benefits. I would say they have like bang for their buck. So you're getting a lot for like a smaller amount of calories. However, I also like to say that all food has a place in the diet. So even though it might not be as nourishing, like let's talk about quinoa. Like quinoa would be one of those 80% foods. Like it has a lot of benefits. It has fiber, it has protein, it has starch. It's going to do a lot for you. But maybe if you are someone who is like nostalgic or has like some emotional needs around food, those types of things, like that quinoa probably is not going to be fulfilling for that. So there are some foods that have those different properties, right? Like I call those our fun foods. And those kind of make up the 20 to 25% of the diet. And those are foods like the pizza or the ice cream or the chips or fried foods and comfort foods and those types of things, because they do have a place in the diet. Because like, for instance, like this weekend is Valentine's Day. Growing up, my mom always made us red Jello on Valentine's Day. I don't know why, but that's just like something we always done. Jello is not a healthy thing, but like this weekend we'll probably make red Jello, so it's like, sure, it doesn't really have a place in the diet, but why not, right? So I kind of thinking about balance in terms of, like I said, kind of that 70-80 really good nourishing foods that are going to fill you up and fulfill all those needs, and then leaving 20 to 30% for those fun foods. The next question that somebody had was about sugar cravings and nighttime snacking. And this one can get a little bit complicated. Typically, when I see sugar cravings, it's for a couple different reasons. One is that you're not consuming enough carbohydrates, or you're not eating enough during the day, especially if those cravings are happening in the evening. So thinking about kind of like a gas tank, right? Like you are running all day. You can only run so long on empty before your body's like, hey, we're going to give you some signs over here. And so that could be that you are not giving yourself enough carbohydrates, or like I said, you're just not eating enough in general, especially as you all are active women, like doing these different workouts and things. So keeping that in mind. And then the other reason would be if you are just going full force and trying to cut sweets out completely. We are humans, and your body tends to want, not necessarily your body, but we always tend to want what retreats from us, right? So like we always want what we can't have. So if I'm telling myself I can't have sugar, I can't have carbs, I can't have this, like we just think about those things, we want those things. So if you have gone all day telling yourself you can't have sugar, you can't have sweets, you can't have anything like that, then at the end of the night, again, your willpower can only go so long before your physiological cues in your body takes over and is like, hey, we actually need some nourishment over here. So kind of keeping that in mind. I hope that answers the question. Going again, kind of down the line, intermittent fasting was a question, like how do I feel about that? And this one is a kind of complicated because there is some research to suggest that intermittent fasting is beneficial for fat loss, but generally when a diet or any sort of like food regimen works, it's because it's doing less calories. So for instance, even if you're following the keto diet or you're following like clean eating or like any type of diet, generally the reason that you're losing weight, it's not because of the food group you gave up, it's because of you're just overall eating less calories. So same thing with intermittent fasting. A lot of the reason that people tend to see success with that is because they cut out a nighttime snack or they cut out their morning Starbucks or something. So like automatically they're consuming less calories, if that makes sense. And then it's also one of those things like, does it work for you? Because I always like to help you find something and help my clients find things that they can do forever, because I don't want you to do something for 6 weeks and then feel like it didn't work and have to try something else. So if you are someone who naturally like doesn't like breakfast or wakes up later or something like that, and your body kind of naturally follows that rhythm of having a shorter eating window, then that's fine. But if you're waking up at 5 a.m. and doing a workout and going to work and like getting your kid to school and you're not eating until noon, like that's probably not the best either. So again, really assessing you and your lifestyle and like, does that work for you? Because I'm sure it could work for some people, but it's not like, yes, you should do intermittent fasting, I guess, if that makes sense. And stop me if I'm like talking too fast, because like I said, got a lot of questions to get to. The next one was about cheat meals. So cheat meals, this one, again, kind of complicated, but typically I would not recommend cheat meals because, again, going back to the philosophy that I presented, when you have a cheat meal, it means that you're viewing food as bad food. Like these are foods that I don't allow myself to have unless it's a cheat day. And when we plan a cheat day like that, sometimes that also, again, creates like guilt and shame around food. Like, oh, I know I'm not supposed to have these. And so we wake up feeling like bad the next day or bloated. And then we like, have resentment against that, which again, kind of creates that poor relationship with food. And so, like I said, I kind of always recommend that 80-20 of, sure, like I can eat good most of the day, but if I want to have a soft drink or if I want to have the cookie or like something like that, I kind of recommend sprinkling it in throughout your week. So it's not like restrict to the point where you can't handle it. Cheat meal or cheat day comes around, all of a sudden we can't control ourselves because we've been, telling ourselves we can't have that all week. And then we overdo it more than we even wanted to on that day, if that makes sense. So like I said, just kind of sprinkle that throughout the week. I have found that people tend to be more successful with that than just having a cheat day. But again, whatever works for you also, because everyone is different. So different things will work for different people. How do you keep a sustainable, healthy, or how do you just keep healthy eating sustainable? Again, kind of going right off of what I just talked about, making sure that you include foods that you love, because that tends to be why people fall off diets, right? It's like, I can follow the meal plan for a week and I can cut out carbs for a month, and then all of a sudden they're at a birthday party or they go out to eat for something and there's alcohol and they like physically can't avoid it any longer. And so then they fall off the wagon, they feel bad about it, they feel guilty, and then it kind of spirals out of there. So like I said, really just including those foods that you love, having that overall balance, and using an approach that, again, you can do forever. It's not like a 3 week, like, oh, I'm going to go hardcore for 3 weeks, because 3 weeks doesn't make up for the rest of the 50 or 49 weeks of the year. So again, going back to balance, which you've heard me say 100 times now. Healthy snacks. Somebody asked about what are some of my favorite healthy snacks. I'm sure probably very similar to all your favorite healthy snacks. I do have a little handout. It's on my Instagram. Some of you may have seen it. It's like 25 snack ideas, but I can also post it in the Facebook group if you would like that. But I mean, for me personally, I like quick things. I always have yogurt probably almost every day, fruit, peanut butter, nuts, almonds, those types of things, cheese sticks. Trying to think of any like specific things that I have quite often. Cheese and crackers, I like that one. Protein shakes occasionally. I guess those would be kind of my go-to. But like I said, I'll make sure that I put that in the Facebook group, so I can send it to Ashley or something. So any diet type questions before we move on? Hopefully I covered most of them. Or if you want clarification on any of that too, I'm happy to talk more about any of them. Good?
Yeah, it looks like you've been answering a lot of the questions of the people that are on right now. So they said that you're answering them. So, but if,
Okay.
I'll keep looking in the chat. Mostly it's people just really liking what you're sharing.
Okay, good. Okay, so the next category I guess I kind of had was emotional eating, which we've talked a little bit about. But when it comes to emotional eating, again, this is kind of a deeper, more complex issue that's not just going to be fixed with like, oh, here's my tip and you're fixed. Like that doesn't necessarily work like that. So when it comes to emotional eating, the first step is going to be figuring out why it is that you're emotional eating. So like kind of getting to that root cause. So if you are doing this often or it's happening like certain times of the month or I would encourage you to start being more aware of when it's happening. I would say that awareness creates change. If you're not aware of something, how can we change it? So being more aware. So like if it's happening, get out your journal, like write out your phone note or, something and saying like, okay, I feel like I'm emotional eating right now. I know that I had a really stressful day at work, or my spouse and I got in a fight, or like, whatever it is, like what is kind of the trigger for that emotional eating. And a lot of times I also see that it has to do with like tiredness, like if you're not getting enough sleep, or like, of course, the week before your period, those types of things can all contribute to that more emotional eating. And then also reframing the mindset around emotional eating can help too. So thinking about like identifying as an emotional eater, like a lot of people say, well, I'm an emotional eater, and kind of taking yourself almost out of that equation. And this is, again, kind of more of a mindset thing. But instead of saying I'm an emotional eater, just changing the phrasing of that and say, sometimes I eat when I'm emotional, because then you're not identifying with that. And it's more like, this is not me as a human. This is an action that I do sometimes. And I don't know, I'm a big believer in our thoughts and our actions dictate, or our thoughts and our words dictate our actions. So just starting to kind of reframe your mindset around how you're thinking about your emotional eating can help a lot as well. But I think the biggest thing would be really getting to the identification of why it's happening. And of course, like if it's, a bigger issue, like I would recommend, getting a therapist or talking to somebody about that emotional issue if that's what's continuously causing these food issues. I hope that answers the question mostly thoroughly. And if you have more about that, let me know. The next one was how to avoid party, or like when you're at a party and there's a lot of food and goodies and things like that, how can that you avoid going into a binge or a state of emotional eating around that time? So typically any sort of binge is a result of a restriction. And as a reminder, restriction can either be a mental restriction or it can be a physical restriction. So a lot of times when we think of restriction, you're like, oh, it's because like they didn't eat food or they didn't eat enough calories or whatever. But like I said earlier, restriction can also be mental in the sense of like, I can't have that, I can't have that, I can't have that. So all of a sudden we get access to it and our body is like, you want it because you've been telling yourself for so long that you can't have it. So that would be mental restriction, is like consistently telling yourself you can have something and then wanting it. And one of the best things that can help with that is, like I said, making sure that you are allowing yourself to have those foods when you want them and sprinkling them in throughout your diet. So when you get to the party, it's not like, oh my gosh, I haven't had chips in a month because I told myself I couldn't have them. Like, allow yourself to have chips once a week, or like, kind of sprinkle them throughout your diet So it's not like this big anomaly when you have access to them for the first time in a long time. And then also going off of like binges and overeating, just in general, making sure that you're eating enough. Like I said, like there's the mental restriction, there's also physical restriction. So one thing that you often hear is like, oh, if you're going to a party, just save up all your calories for that party. Sounds like a good idea in theory, but all of a sudden, if we save up all our calories until the night of the party, and then again, we haven't eaten all day, our body's like, I need food. And so sometimes it kind of goes into that state of out of controlness, which is what we would consider to be a binge. So hopefully that kind of answers some of those questions. How would one go about healing a relationship with food? So again, more of a complicated answer here. I'm sure most of you have heard of like the concept or book like Intuitive Eating. So I would highly recommend that book. If this is something that you truly feel like you struggle with, it's one of those things that it's like when you're reading the book, it's very like one-sided. Like this is the only way to do it. You can't diet. You can't do this, da, da, da. And so I would encourage you to go in with an open mind because it can, but there are some very interesting statistics in there about dieting and how dieting really is a lot more harmful to us than good, and how it talks a lot about like primal humans and how, you know, we'll do anything to take care of ourselves and you know, eat enough food and things like that. So when we're on a diet, it's going against that, and that tends to be why our body like rebels and things like that. So it is very interesting. But again, go into it with an open mind. But a lot of what I teach clients comes from that book. So one of the first things that they recommend is rejecting diet mentality. So like I said, when we talk about diet mentality, it's really that social norm that's telling us that our body needs to be smaller in order to be a happier, better person. And that's just not the truth. So starting to reject that in terms of like anytime thinking about your diet thoughts and kind of asking where they came from. So like, oh, I should have bread. And then kind of thinking about like, where did I hear that first? And oh, it was from Weight Watchers when I was, 13, doing it with my mom. Like, okay. And then like exploring that thought a little bit more. Because a lot of times the things that we know about food and the diet thoughts that we have, they're not the truth. It's just because we heard them somewhere or they were on some plan that we did at one point. And so really starting to explore where they came from and ask yourself like, oh, is this truth, or is this just something that I learned along the way, or like a food rule that I learned along the way? So that would be a big one. The other principles, there's like 10 different principles that it goes through if you haven't read it yet. The next one is I can't remember if it's the next one, but one of them is honor your hunger. So again, making sure you're eating when you're hungry, not going all day without meals, or if you're feeling hungry, like have a meal at that time, because if we don't have a meal when we're hungry, that tends to be when we get to the next meal and we overeat because we allowed ourselves to get to a point where we're almost too hungry. Giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. So again, whatever food it is that you're wanting, making sure you're satisfying both your emotional hunger as well as your physical hunger. So that's where some of those food, like more fun foods, come into play, I guess you would say, because those are more typically satisfying those like emotional needs as opposed to physical needs. And then it does go a lot into the more emotional side of eating, like making sure that when you are feeling like emotional hunger, like what type of emotional hunger is it? And like being able to identify different hunger cues. So highly recommend that book if that's something that you truly feel like you struggle with or that relationship with food. All right, any questions on emotional eating before we move on to some of the family questions?
I don't think so. That was very insightful. I'll have to look into that book too.
Yes, it's very good. Like I said, it's very informational. Like I said, you might have some different opinions, but it is very interesting.
Yeah, I do have a question, but I'm going to wait till you finish about, it's like a customer that reached out to me and it's one of her. So I'll wait till you finish, but I do want to ask it after you're done.
Okay. There actually was one on here too about customers that asked about feeling guilty about food, which we've kind of discussed. But okay, so the next ones were mainly like family questions, people that have kids. I personally don't have kids, so any of these answers go against what you think. I am open to other opinions. But somebody asked, how do I explain good versus bad food to my kid without using the terms good versus bad? So I guess one thing that I can always recommend is that kids have intuitive eating. So that intuitive eating that I just talked about, like we have that instilled in us from a young age, and we unlearn it over time based on diet rules and things that we hear. So kids really do have that intuitiveness. And my biggest recommendation to you would be don't take that away from them. Allow them to eat until they're full and not necessarily finish their entire plate if they don't want to, allowing them to try a lot of different foods and educating them about food more in terms of what it does for their body, but not telling them necessarily that they can't have it. So like, oh, like we're having this, you know, maybe you're talking about bread or carbs or something, like, oh, we're eating this because this is what gives you energy and like gives you enough energy for your brain and things like that. We have protein because that makes you big and strong and helps you grow muscles. And when we have fruits and vegetables, like that gives us vitamins and minerals and fiber, which is not fiber, but they do give us fiber, but I was going to say good for your eyes, and that's vitamins and minerals. That's not fiber. But vitamins and minerals, like they do a lot of things for our body. They help your hair grow and they're good for your eyes and they make your fingernails grow. And so kind of explaining them in terms of what the food does for you. And then also you can use that term like fun food, like, oh, these are the foods that like make us feel good and they give us energy. And these are the fun foods. We save these foods for, you know, when it's a birthday or like when it's a special occasion or the weekend or something like that. But not necessarily creating that like, oh, you shouldn't eat that food, but just maybe explaining to them that different foods are for different occasions and different purposes.
I really like that. I really like that because you know, obviously my daughter's only one, so it's like I want to know for the future when we can talk about it more. And I like the idea of maybe, you know, yeah, like looking up like what foods do for, you know, for our bodies. Good for us to know too, right? As adults. And then sharing that. I like that idea. So thank you for telling us that.
Yeah, definitely. I know I don't know if anybody else has like babies, but my sister, I have a little nephew, he's 7 months old now. And so I've been learning a little bit vicariously through her, but she just did baby led weaning with her baby. And I don't know if any of you know what it is, but basically you don't give your baby any sort of like baby food. You start them like when they're 5, 6 months old, like he'll suck on a broccoli or something like that, because it helps them get kind of like the taste and the texture, because a lot of kids that grow up and have issues with texture, it's because they weren't introduced to that like at a younger age. And babies like have that chewing motion, and most of the time at that age they're still getting a lot of their nutrients from the milk that they're consuming, whether it be formula or breast milk. And so they don't necessarily need the nutrients from the food. So if you just give them and start to expose them to the food, they're more likely to be less picky from that young age and get exposed to the textures and the flavors and things like that. And then they also don't have to like relearn to eat when they're 9 or 10 months old once we're trying to wean them off baby food. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I did do that with my daughter, and my parents thought I was nuts at first, and they were really freaked out by it. It definitely at like the first month was the hardest because they're so little and they're like gagging and stuff, and you kind of like got to start with like the mushier food if you can, like if you're nervous and stuff. But we made it to 80 foods as of last week. So the goal was 100, didn't make it, but whatever, it's fine.
Okay.
But I definitely suggest it. Yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the last question on here that I had, and we can circle back to any other ones that maybe resurfaced, was what do you do about, it was the one that you sent me today, Ashley. What do you do about if your family doesn't necessarily want to eat the foods that you're eating, or if you're trying to eat healthier and your kids, your spouse, or somebody doesn't want to eat those foods, and how not to waste food? So kind of, again, a complicated answer, but what I always tell my clients when they are trying to make different choices that maybe their immediate environment people are not making is that this is a time where you really do need to learn to be a leader and be willing to lead. Because again, like if you have kids and you're a mom, you are setting an example for your kids. So if they see like mom is eating healthy and like mom's eating fruits and vegetables and like eating all the foods and making sure they're having balanced meals, like one, they're going to be more likely to follow suit and do that. Two, and just encouraging them to try it, because a lot of times when kids don't like a food, it's because they haven't been exposed to it enough, or they haven't tried it. And so again, encouraging them to try. Every time mom has the food, have them try the food, even if they don't eat it or they don't like it, like just making sure that they have that exposure so they have the opportunity to try it. Right now I work with college students, and it's incredible the amount of people that like, oh, well, I don't like that. I'm like, oh, have you tried it? Like, no. Like, okay, well, that would be a place to start. So having that exposure from the younger age can be really helpful. For the food waste part, that's kind of difficult, because I guess I would say find a middle ground. So again, you don't have to be like, if you're only eating kale chips and broccoli at dinner and your kids don't want to eat that, like, okay, but can we find a middle ground and say, okay, well, maybe we can have pasta and they want the Alfredo sauce and like I want the red sauce because it's a little bit of a lighter option, or like they want fried chicken and I want regular chicken or something like that, and kind of meeting in the middle that way, and finding maybe one or two of the meal components that you can all have, and then you maybe have an additional vegetable, like maybe you get a steamable bag of vegetables or something. Maybe they don't eat it, but it's something that you make an effort to add to your meal. And again, that's showing them you're being a leader, and they eventually might follow suit. It might just take a little bit longer. So that was most of the questions I had here. There was one that I was looking back at now. It says, how should we advise our customers when they tell us they feel guilty about their food choices? I think honestly, just kind of going back to everything that I talked about, is making sure they know that there's not necessarily such thing as good and bad food, and good food just has different purposes. And yeah, I think that's the best way I found to explain it, is that some food is more nourishing than others, but that doesn't mean the other food doesn't have a place in the diet.
Yeah, I like that perspective. Andrea, by the way, Andrea said, great point on the exposure toddler. She's a toddler mom, so she has a toddler. And I feel like, I don't know if anybody else thought of this, but I feel like husbands also fall in that category of like exposing them to healthy foods and getting them to eat it. Cause I know like my sister's husband is very picky. And so whenever I tell her about food that I made, like she'll be like, oh, I would eat that, but he wouldn't. Where my husband is very picky too, but I've learned to just like continually make different meals, and he'll try them. Sometimes he'll tell me he didn't like it at all. Other times he will end up liking it more than he thought he would. So I think, I don't know, I guess for me personally, I'm not saying this is going to work for anybody else, but if he doesn't really cook, so if I cook, that's all the food he has to eat. If there's not stuff in the freezer for him to make, like he had kind of started eating because he wasn't going to order a pizza on every night. So I think it's just a matter of like trying new things, like exposure and whatnot. But I think that's a really good point to make about kids, because they all are going to say one day that they don't want something. And also another thing that you said that reminded me, I don't know about anybody else, but I grew up where like one parent, they grew up like never waste any food. So then they said that to us, like, you can't leave the dinner table till you clean your plate and blah, blah, blah. And I definitely don't want to do that with my kids, because, and they don't care about that stuff anymore, my parents. But I've seen a lot of that going around from dietitians and nutritionists and stuff, like not forcing your kids to eat everything, like, they know if they're full and whatnot. So you reminded me of that, I think, when you said something about that earlier.
Yeah, that kind of goes right in hand, that intuitive eating is, like I said, kids have that ingrained in them from the time that they're kids, and we kind of take that away from them by making them eat at these like regimented times, and like making sure they eat all their things on their plate. And so, yeah, like allowing them to feel their hunger, and feel their fullness, and when they're full, allowing them to stop. And of course, still having structure around meals. I'm not saying like, oh, you're done, like you can go run around, like still having that structure, because kids do need that, but not necessarily around food specifically.
Yeah. I had a question about, so I had a customer recently email me last week about basically how, because obviously I'm not a dietitian and a nutritionist, but I want to, point people in the right direction. She basically said that she's older, in her 50s, and literally she's on Nutrisystem, which is only allowing her 1,000 calories a day. I cannot even imagine. I cannot physically eat just 1,000 calories a day.
Yeah.
I would be starving. And she's doing MBF. I'm like, oh my gosh, like she needs to be eating more. And I even said that, and I obviously I said it in a different way, but I don't think she's getting it still, like that she needs to be eating more calories, because she's like, should I be doing more than just one MBF workout a day? And I'm like, no, like that, but that's the diet culture, especially like the older, like like the
Yes,
older
yeah.
generation that grew, that's when like the 80s and 90s was like all of this wrong misinformation or whatever. So like how, I mean, I know we can just give them the resources and they use it how they want to use it, but like, I just need to get through to her somehow, that I think that there's a lot of people out there that think that they still think you have to eat way less calories. You have to count calories. You have to be low in calories to get results. And like, she's not getting results because her body is in starvation mode.
Right. I guess explaining it in that sense. So a lot of times, like when people aren't seeing results for that long, one, it could be that she's just been in a low calorie state for so long. Like you said, her body is just kind of in maintenance mode. Like I have gotten used to surviving on this many calories. And so, but I'm also not going to go any lower because I know that I need these calories for my next, again, going back to like primal, like famine type is like what your body usually thinks about. So explaining that, and then also kind of using that like gas tank analogy, like I'm sure you may have used before, but like when you're expending energy all day, like of course you're expending energy during your workouts, but you're also expending energy like just using your brain and like walking back and forth to your car and vacuuming and doing laundry, like all of those types of things that make you expend energy. And generally people need, I mean, you could just use like the 2,000 calories a day, like generally people need about 2,000 calories a day. And if you're not feeding it enough, your body's kind of running on that empty gas tank, and you probably aren't getting enough energy to get the most out of your workouts and like, have enough energy to do the things that you want to do. And like even asking her about her energy. So like that's one thing I usually can tell if people aren't eating enough, like, oh, well, by the time it gets to 2, 3 in the afternoon, like I'm so tired, like I am crashing, those types of things. And it just could be because your body's running on empty. So kind of asking about like energy and things like that and encouraging her to eat more that way. But yeah, it is very hard to reverse that mentality, especially in people like that have been doing it for probably 30 or more years.
Okay, yeah, good to know. Though that's a good idea, just to kind of talk about. I'll use the analogy for sure. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions? I know you answered all of the really top topics and questions that everyone had, and everyone was commenting in the chat. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
I have one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Something I was kind of experiencing today, so it came to mind. Like right around like your period time, when I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but I have like an endless pit of a stomach. So is that normal? And also like how can you, I know you said being just like more aware, and maybe if you just have any tips.
Yes. So it is very normal. I will say that, like, tends to be your hormones, and your hormones are what control your appetite and all of that stuff. So it's like when they're out of whack, everything is a little bit out of whack. I will say when you are in that pre-period, like PMS phase and a little bit into your period, we actually burn more calories. Women burn about 250 to 300 more calories the week before and during their period. So it does give you warrant to eat a little bit more during that time. But I think, again, just making sure during those weeks, because I think like if you on those weeks you have a night where you like overdo it, it's really easy to wake up the next day and say, oh, I'm not going to eat that much, or like I feel bad about what I did. And still making sure you're having like 3 good balanced meals a day. And because again, we never want to make ourselves get so hungry that it's like when you have access to the chocolate, like that's all you're going to eat. but then like have some chocolate, like it's fine. But still making sure that you're getting those good nourishing foods that are going to give you energy and things like that. But no, there's no secret, I guess I would say, that I'm keeping from you.
That's interesting to know. I didn't know that we burned more calories during that time. I had no idea.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what it is, but like I mean, you probably experienced it too. Like a lot of people feel like the week of your period, like feel like slimmer almost, or like more, I don't know, like not even energized. But yeah, like I feel like during that week, I always feel a little bit better. But yeah, it's usually because that week leading up specifically, we burn about 250 to 300 extra calories a day.
So interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot that, I think that's good to know too, like the hormone. Did you say hormones control your appetite? Is that what you said? Or did you say something else? Did I write that down wrong?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, when the week before your period is like when your hormones are all out of whack, and hormones are really what control everything in your body. So we have hormones that control like when we feel hungry, and like hormones that control when we feel full, and like all of that type of thing. So yes, when like one is out of whack, a lot of the other ones can be out of whack too.
Yeah, I love what you guys are saying in here. People are saying very informative. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions for Taylor before we close it out? I feel like we're gonna have like random things pop up in our heads or in situations, but I feel like you covered so much and quickly too. So appreciate that. I wrote a lot of notes as well.
Oh, cool.
But thank you so much. I think one of my favorite parts was I really like the 3 categories. I noticed because I do use the containers, but not like I use them like 80%, 75% of the time. And I do feel like they work really well for me because it makes me have at least three categories of the carbs, the proteins, a fruit or veggie every meal. Whereas when I would just wing it myself, I'd have like maybe 2, maybe a protein and a veggie, or maybe a carb and a protein or whatever. So I noticed like if I have 3 to 4, at meals, I'm much more energized, more full, all the things. So, but I like the way you kind of broke it down, and yeah, I think, it's our job in this community to, kind of relearn what's really the right way to think about food and to fuel our bodies, and to kind of like reverse the diet culture that like maybe our parents or like other generations before us, they didn't know any better either. They just heard what they heard in magazines and on TV and all these things. So I think the more we educate ourselves by and from people like Taylor, the more we can, help ourselves and help the people we're impacting and coaching and our followers and whatnot. So thank you so much, Taylor.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was fun.
And what's your Instagram again? So, or like if people, don't know you on social media, or what's the best way to follow you, contact you, learn about even just, the services that you offer and whatnot?
Yeah. So Instagram is probably the easiest. I'm just like at tay.vandyk. And so that's probably the easiest. And then if you're interested in like more, I do have my own Facebook community where I do like more like full live trainings, because Instagram is hard to do like long trainings. But in there I do more like once a week I go live and like talk about some sort of topic. So if you are interested in that, it's Tailored Nutrition Coaching Community. Or if you're interested, you can just find me on Instagram and I can give you the link there.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Could you actually, when you have a chance this week, go into our team Facebook page and post those snack ideas and maybe the link to your Facebook group and whatever else you want to share, and then everyone can see it, because I know there was some people that asked questions that weren't on this call that are going to be watching the recording. So if they see your post in the team page too, that will help them kind of get connected with you and whatnot.
Yes, I will do that tonight.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for hopping on and learning from Taylor. And thank you again, Taylor, for all of this great information. And I hope everyone has a good rest of your night and week ahead. Okay. Bye.